I pulled the roast from the oven just as the timer rang. The smell filled the kitchen. Warm, savory, comforting. It reminded me of Sunday dinners with my husband before he passed, when laughter was easy and no one needed an invitation to sit at the table. I brushed the pan juices over the top, proud of how tender it looked when Janelle's voice cut through the air. "Leave that food alone. My relatives are coming over." For a second, I thought she was joking. The tone was sharp but casual, the kind of thing said when people are tired or stressed. I waited for a smile. It never came. She brushed past me, opened the oven, and frowned at the roast as though I'd ruined something sacred. "I already planned the menu," she said, moving the roast to the counter like it didn't belong. "We're doing seafood tonight." Seafood. I looked at the receipts tucked under the magnet on the fridge. Every item on that counter had come from my card that morning. I'd spent 2 hours shopping thinking I was helping. My hands still smelled of garlic and thyme. Ellis came in a moment later, loosening his tie. He glanced between us, sensed the tension, and exhaled. "Mom maybe let Janelle handle dinner tonight." Just like that, like I was the one interrupting. I stepped aside. "Of course," I said softly. They moved around me, setting the table for 12. I noticed there were only 11 plates at first. Then Janelle added one more, but not for me. By the time her family arrived, the kitchen smelled of grilled shrimp and butter. I stayed near the doorway, wiping a spotless counter, pretending to be busy. They laughed, toasted, filled their glasses with wine I had bought last week. I could hear Janelle telling a story about how they'd built this home together. No one asked where I was. No one looked toward the kitchen. I sat down quietly on a stool near the window, my hands folded on my lap, watching the roast grow cold. That was the moment I realized I was no longer part of the table. I was part of the house. The party carried on long after I left the kitchen. I stayed in my suite, the little in-law unit at the back of the house, tucked behind a narrow hallway and separated by a sliding barn door that never quite closed all the way. When we first looked at this place, Ellis had stood with one arm around me and the other gesturing toward this wing. "It'll be your forever suite," he said. "Private, peaceful, perfect for you." I had sold my townhouse within a week, signed over every cent of the proceeds to help with the down payment. I didn't want much, just a room of my own, and to be close to them. Now that room felt smaller than I remembered. The walls were thin. I could hear laughter drift in from the dining room. At one point, Janelle's aunt cackled so loud I could hear every word. "She's still here. Thought she'd be in a condo by now," the woman said. "Old people sure know how to linger." Someone else laughed. The kind of laugh that tells you they agree. I didn't move. I just stared at the ceiling and waited for the hum of the dishwasher to replace their voices. Later that night, once the clinking of glasses had died down, I slipped into the kitchen. The light above the stove was still on. I opened the fridge, first half a tray of Oyster's fancy jars, leftover risotto labeled with someone else's name. Then the freezer. The roast was gone. Not wrapped, not stored. Just gone. In its place were boxes, imported appetizers with gold-stamped labels. Mini quiches, sea salt caramels, duck puffs with truffle drizzle. I stood there for a long moment, the cold air brushing my face. My fingers stayed curled around the freezer door handle. I didn't feel angry, just hollow. I closed the door gently, turned off the light, walked back down the hall to my room. On the nightstand, my water glass was still full from earlier. Beside it sat the framed photo of Ellis from his college graduation, the one I had once kept on my mantle. I turned it face down. The envelope was thick, one of those heavy-duty types with pre-printed barcodes, and a faint official seal near the corner. I signed for it without much thought. It was addressed to the house, not to me. Back in my suite, I opened it carefully. Tax documents, mortgage assessments, county evaluations. I flipped through each page, scanning for something, anything that said my name. Nothing. Not on the return address. Not on the mortgage. Not on the deed summary attached in the back. It was all Ellis. Just Ellis. I held the papers in my lap for a long time before folding them back into the envelope and carrying them to the kitchen. It was still early. The house was quiet. Janelle was rearranging the spice rack while Ellis stirred something on the stove. "Got a delivery today," I said, softly, setting the envelope on the table. "From the tax office." Ellis didn't respond. I noticed my name wasn't anywhere on the paperwork I added, pouring myself a cup of tea. I thought we'd talked about co-owning. He still didn't meet my eyes. Janelle answered instead. "Oh," that she said with a tight smile. "We thought it was simpler this way. Less complicated for taxes. Your family. Why does it matter?" I stirred a spoon of honey into my cup. My hands didn't shake, but my chest felt heavy. Later that night, after they'd gone to bed, I opened the laptop in the shared office space. I knew the password to the family account Ellis had shown me once when I needed to print something for the DMV. The deed was there. PDF format. Clear as daylight. Owner Ellis R. Ortiz. No mention of me, not even in the notes, not even as occupant. I sat back in the desk chair, staring at the screen. The hum of the refrigerator behind me suddenly felt loud. The next morning began like any other. I made coffee, watered the potted fern by the window, and checked the shared laptop on the kitchen counter to print a few recipes I'd bookmarked. Ellis had left it open again. The screen glowed faintly with the family email account still signed in. I moved the mouse, expecting to see the inbox. Instead, a file window appeared, folders neatly organized and labeled. One name caught my eye: transition plan. At first, I thought it was something for Ellis's work, but when I clicked, the list of documents stopped me cold. Each file had my name in it. Clarabelle funds. Transfer confirmation. Timeline. Q2. My breath caught. I opened one. Inside were notes, short bullet points, and snippets of email exchanges between Janelle and someone named R. O'Hara-esque. The words blurred for a second before settling into clarity. "We'll wait until Q2, then rekey the locks. Her funds are cleared." She signed. She can't undo it. I scrolled further, finding attachments, screenshots of bank transfers, a scanned check, a copy of the sale agreement from my old townhouse. Every number matched what I'd given them. Every dollar I'd saved over a lifetime sat now under their names. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My coffee cooled beside me. I felt the same ache I'd felt the day Ellis left for college, a hollow space opening inside my chest. But this time, it wasn't pride. It was something darker. I unplugged the flash drive from my keychain and slid it into the port. My fingers trembled as I copied the entire folder. Progress bars crawled across the screen, each percent heavier than the last. When the transfer finished, I ejected the drive, tucked it into my pocket, and closed the laptop. The cursor blinked in the empty search bar, waiting for the next command. That evening, while the house filled with the smell of dinner, I sat at my table and stared at the flash drive. I knew then that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a plan. And tomorrow, I would find someone who could tell me exactly what they'd done. I took the bus into town the next morning. The legal aid office was tucked between a shuttered bakery and a pharmacy with dusty windows. No sign out front, just a paper taped to the door. Walk-ins welcome. Appointments preferred. Inside, a woman behind a partition handed me a form and a clipboard. She didn't ask questions. She just smiled and nodded when I told her I had something important to show someone. An hour later, I sat across from a young attorney named Callum. He couldn't have been older than 30, with tired eyes and a pen that never stopped clicking. I slid the flash drive across the table without a word. He plugged it in, scrolled, and began to read. I watched his face shift. First curiosity, then tension, then something closer to anger. When he reached the emails, he leaned back. "You were misled," he said carefully. "And possibly coerced. This isn't just unethical, it may be criminal." I didn't speak. I just waited. He began outlining next steps. Financial elder abuse, unlawful transfer of assets, potential fraud if documents were signed under pressure. He used terms like injunction and temporary freeze. He talked quickly, flipping through forms highlighting areas, but his tone was steady. Then he paused. "I know you may want to confront them," he said. "But don't. Not yet. If they suspect anything, they could move funds or change the locks. We need to act quietly, but firmly." I nodded. Back home, I made soup. Lentils and carrots, just enough for 3. The smell filled the kitchen, gentle and familiar. I set the table without thinking. 3 bowls, 3 spoons, napkins folded the way I always used to. They didn't come. Janelle had ordered takeout. Ellis never looked up from his phone. So I sat down and ate alone. Slowly, 1 spoon at a time. And that night, I slept through until morning. No tossing, no waking. Just sleep deep and undisturbed. When I woke, the house was quiet, and I knew it was time to start gathering what belonged to me. The invitations never came anymore, not even the pretense of one. I knew it was Sunday by the sound of glassware clinking, chairs scraping, and the unmistakable scent of butter and char. Cars I didn't recognize filled the driveway. Children ran through the hall like they knew the place better than I ever would. I stayed in my suite, door cracked just enough to hear. Janelle's voice rang louder than usual, lifted with whine and praise. Ellis laughed when someone mentioned how well they'd settled in. Around dusk, I stepped into the kitchen for a glass of water. A little girl wandered in, clutching a toy rabbit with one ear missing. She looked up at me with clear, curious eyes. "Are you the maid?" she asked. I smiled gently and handed her a cup of cold water. "No, sweetheart," I said, "just someone who's lived here a long time." She thanked me and disappeared before I could ask her name. Minutes later, Janelle breezed into the kitchen in heels too tall for comfort, carrying a near-empty tray. "Can you clean up after everyone leaves?" she asked. Not unkindly, not kindly either, just as if it were obvious. I nodded. Not because I agreed, just because it was easier. That night, after the guests were gone and the dishes still sat in the sink, I pulled out the accordion file from my closet. Every grocery receipt, every tax bill, every property maintenance fee I'd paid since moving in. I laid them out on the bed and started organizing by date, by category, by purpose. It took hours. I printed missing copies, highlighted totals, labeled folders by color. When I finished, the documents looked like something built for court, because they were. I tucked them neatly into a canvas bag, zipped it shut, and set it by the door. It was late, but I didn't feel tired. Instead, I moved quietly through the kitchen, turning off lights, wiping counters, and making sure the house was as spotless as they liked it. Then I locked my suite door, slipped into bed, and listened as the mailbox clicked shut in the hallway. The call came just after lunch. I had been clipping old receipts into a final folder when my cell buzzed. Ms. Ortiz-Callum's voice was calm but clear. "The injunction is approved. Effective immediately. They can't sell, refinance, or transfer the house or any joint assets. We've frozen everything connected to your original contribution." I thanked him. Not because it felt good, but because it felt necessary. I hung up, folded my hands in my lap, and exhaled. That evening, a certified letter arrived, addressed to Ellis and Janelle. I didn't need to open it to know what it contained. I heard it land on the front hallway table with a hollow thud. The reaction came swiftly. Janelle's voice was first high, sharp, furious. I heard papers being rustled, a chair kicked across the tile. Then Ellis, lower, angrier. When the footsteps approached my door, I didn't move. The knock came fast, followed by the door flying open without waiting. He stood there, face flushed. "You're ruining everything," he spat. "Why would you do this to us?" I looked up from my tea. "No," I said, calm as ever. "I'm preserving it." He stood there for a few seconds longer, fists clenched like he expected me to backpedal. I didn't. Then he left, slamming the door behind him hard enough to rattle the clock on the wall. They didn't speak to me for the next 2 days. Not a word. No glares. No slammed cabinets. Just silence. I spent my mornings in the small patch of garden behind my suite. The roses were starting to bloom again, slow but steady. I trimmed the dead leaves, checked the soil, watered carefully, never too much, never too fast. In the afternoons, I made notes in a spiral notebook, expenses, dates, names of guests I'd never met, but had fed with my grocery budget. At night, I read by the lamp beside my bed and let the quiet settle around me like a second blanket. And on the third morning, the summons for the court hearing arrived, folded crisp in a white envelope waiting on the porch, like it had always belonged there. The courtroom was colder than I expected. The walls were pale and windowless, the kind of place where voices carried whether you wanted them to or not. I sat at the petitioner's table with Callum beside me, a stack of labeled folders in front of us like bricks in a quiet wall. Ellis and Janelle entered 5 minutes before the hearing started. Matching suits, polished shoes, not a hair out of place. She didn't look at me. He didn't look at her. When the clerk called the case, the judge looked up with tired eyes but a sharp voice. He didn't waste time. Callum walked the court, through the evidence with measured precision emails between Janelle and her attorney, screenshots of my bank transfers records, showing how my name had been deliberately excluded from documents. Then came the falsified power of attorney filing one I had never signed, dated 2 weeks after I moved in. Their lawyer tried to argue consent. Convenience? Family trust. The words clattered into the silence like coins on a tiled floor. The judge didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His decision came with quiet finality. I would regain partial legal ownership of the property. Ellis and Janelle would pay financial restitution equal to the proceeds of my townhouse. They would also cover my legal fees in full. It was written clearly. It was read aloud. It was entered into the record. When the judge adjourned, Janelle's mother leaned forward from the bench behind and hissed, "This was your plan all along, wasn't it?" I turned, slightly, met her eyes for just a moment, and said nothing. Outside the courtroom, Ellis walked ahead. Janelle followed behind him, arms crossed tight over her chest, like armor that didn't quite fit anymore. Callum offered to walk me to the bus stop, but I declined. I wanted the air. I needed the walk. When I got home, the house was silent. No one said a word when I stepped through the front door. But on the entryway table, there was a single cardboard box, waiting sealed, labeled in marker, with just one word: Mom. They didn't move out right away. First came the cold silences, the slammed doors, the stiff smiles when neighbors passed. Then gradually, the signs appeared. Closets, emptied furniture, rearranged cardboard boxes stacked in corners. Ellis hired movers. Professional, polite, efficient. They came on a Tuesday morning, backing into the driveway with a truck that blocked my garden light. I stayed in my suite while they packed. I didn't ask where they were going. No one offered to tell me. Janelle passed me once in the hallway. Her arms were full of folded linens, and her eyes skimmed right over me like I wasn't there. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't say anything. By evening, the house was quiet again. Lighter, somehow. The air had shifted. When I walked into the front room, I noticed one box left by the door. It wasn't taped shut like the others, just folded over once with a corner slightly bent. Inside were a few things I hadn't seen in years. A photo of Ellis at 13 standing with his science fair trophy. a cracked table lamp from my old guest room, a scarf I thought I'd lost during the move, and a card. Plain white, the kind you buy in bulk. No envelope. No name. I opened it slowly. The message was written in dark ink, the letters slightly tilted the way Ellis's always were when he was nervous. "I'm sorry, Mom. I just wanted something of my own. No signature." I read it twice, then folded it carefully and carried it back to my suite. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I opened the drawer in my nightstand and placed the card inside between a worn bookmark and an old button from a winter coat I no longer wore. I didn't tear it. I didn't write back. Later that night, I washed a single plate, wiped down a quiet kitchen, and made myself a cup of tea. Then I sat at the dining table, my dining table, and opened the folder Callum had mailed me that morning. I ate my breakfast at the kitchen table the next morning. 2 eggs, a slice of toast, and a pear that had finally ripened just right. The sun came through the window, warming the edges of the tablecloth I'd had since the old townhouse. My kitchen. My table. I washed my plate and set it in the rack to dry. Then I opened the manila envelope from Callum and pulled out the clean copy of the revised deed. My name was there now in bold letters, spelled right. No asterisks, no footnotes. It felt final, but not bitter, just quiet. That afternoon, I sat at the table with a notepad and started outlining my new will. I didn't need much. I wasn't trying to send a message. I was just choosing where things would go on my terms this time. A portion of the house would go to a foundation that helped retired teachers find affordable housing. I remembered what it was like to sort through the classifieds with a red pen, circling places that were always too far or too expensive. I wanted someone else to have one less thing to worry about. The rest I kept, not because I needed to, because I could. I left one room untouched, the in-law suite at the end of the hall, not because I expected anyone to return, not because I wanted them to, but because the memory of someone does not always vanish with the person. Later that day, I pulled down the dusty recipe box from the top shelf, the one with my mother's handwriting inside, and picked out something simple for dinner. The silence in the house wasn't heavy anymore. It was mine. As the evening settled in and the streetlights flickered on outside, I locked the front door and turned off the lights one by one. Then I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the stillness. Nothing called out. Nothing pulled at me. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anyone to come home.